Yeah, good morning, everybody. New week, global economics, and next week we will go to Frankfurt. And yeah, here I show you the program again, and we will start in Wilhelmshaven, and this I will upload for you in the Moodle course. I think this we can see. We have it a little bit larger, or even 150. So our train is leaving in Wilhelmshaven on Wednesday at 14:40, and hopefully, if Mr. Wieselski is nothing doing the next 2 weeks, we will be in the evening around 9 in Frankfurt. And on Saturday, if you want, you can travel then back about noon, and you will be back in Wilhelmshaven then around 7 o'clock. And as I mentioned it before, if you want to stay longer in Frankfurt, then yeah, you have to organize your own travel back to the sea. Yeah, we will start at Thursday at the German Stock Exchange, and then we will go to the European Central Bank, and on Friday to the German Bundesbank, and in the afternoon to the insurer Allianz, or more or less one of their investment part, Allianz Global Investors. And I think, yeah, well, in these times, it will be very interesting what these institutions, or here on Friday afternoon, somebody who is in the lead of one of the largest investment funds in the world. Allianz Global Investors is around 15th or 20th largest investment funds in the world. Well, on Thursday afternoon, evening, if you want, we can make together a little city tour, and if we find something on Friday, going to theater, to the opera or whatever, well, we will see what we will do then in Frankfurt. Yeah, we will stay at the youth hostel in Frankfurt, and as you see it here, everything is situated quite in the city. Well, the German Bundesbank is a little bit outside, but we can go there also by the metro. This will be no problem, and everything else is just situated downtown in Frankfurt. What I'm not having already mentioned, I think, is that the university is not paying for our food. So this we have to pay ourselves, and then especially in the youth hostel, we have to pay by our own privately the breakfast. Yes. Okay. This is then for our Frankfurt trip, and for the ECB and the German Stock Exchange, I have to hand in a list of participation, and yeah, For this, yeah, I will also ask who in the end will participate and ask this week within the Moodle course. Okay, then do you have any questions about the trip next week right now? Okay, then hopefully the trains will go next week because yeah, this weekend I had to change to car because my train was not going. Okay, this I forgot. This I will also ask you. That I would find it quite nice if we, yeah, could create some reader or a little paper about the trip. So I will ask you that you form 4 groups and where you then just write, not very much, 1 or 2 pages with some pictures or whatever about the 4 institutions we have. This we don't need next week. I think we will add then also some pictures from our trip in Frankfurt, and then we can yeah, organize this together. And I think this would be quite nice if we could then remember with such a reader in some years. Okay, but for this I will also ask you in the Moodle course. Okay, then let's go back to our content, or what was it else? Okay, I don't know now if we could still have our talk of Dr. Jörg Rahn, because well, he has still Corona, and so we will see if he can come this week or maybe in December, but we will see. Okay, so then let's go back to our content. And yeah, what did we do last time? Yeah, we did a quite large calculation, and we dealt with the so-called time inconsistency problem of monetary policy. And for this, we at first assumed that a central bank has in general some target function, and this target function will in general depend on 2 targets. One is of course inflation, and another one is output, or sometimes you also write within this formula an unemployment target, especially if you look at the Federal Reserve, then you quite often hear that they will change their monetary policy if the unemployment rate in the United States will reach some specific point. But of course, we have a general trade-off between inflation and output or unemployment. Remember, you have done, or you should do within your papers, these dependence of output and unemployment via Okun's law. And then we can also feed in the prices via the general ASAD model, and then we came to the so-called Phillips curve, where we have this dependence between inflation and output, and of course, since we have within the Okun's law a dependence between output and unemployment, you can also translate this problem to a target function where you don't have output as a target, but you have unemployment as a target. Well, and then we will see that, as it is quite often in economics, many things are just about expectations. So what I am expecting and what is expecting, so to speak, my opponent. And especially within the Phillips curve, we discussed that the dependence is directly the dependence on inflation is actually depending on the case if we have, so to speak, right expectations that the actual inflation rate pi meets the expected inflation rates, or if we differ and then we have a change upward or downward with respect to the actual output. And this means then that we assumed, as we make it very, very often in economics, that we have some target function and that we want to optimize this target function with respect to some condition. Remember there also the case when you have your household utility maximization, where you just said I can invest or I can spend my money for two goods, X and Y, and unfortunately I'm restricted that I have a fixed amount of money. And more or less, yeah, this is conceptually the same thing which we are doing here, that we have some target function and that we are restricted by the assumption that the Phillips curve applies. And then we can, in this case, maximize our or minimize our losses if we then just feed in our condition within our target function, because then we only have a loss function depending on one variable, and then we took the derivative with respect to these left variable, our inflation, setting this to 0. And having done this, we obtained then an optimal inflation rate depending on the expected inflation rate. And this is the so-called reaction function. So we are with our target inflation depending on what is our opponent. So in this case, we assume on the one side you have the central bank, and on the other side you have society, which is forming its expectations. And yeah, then we can make different assumptions about these expectations. And what we have assumed last week was that we make, so to speak, rational expectations. And what does this mean if we have rational expectations? Well, this means that we are quite transparent so that we also know the loss function of the central bank, and we know that they want to minimize their losses. And due to this minimization process, we, so to speak, as a society, know also the reaction function of the central bank, and then in equilibrium, since we make no mistakes, so to speak, we can set the inflation rate which the central bank wants to set. And here we assume that we, more or less can directly steer the economy via setting the interest rates. Well, this is of course a quite hard assumption, but on the other way, look at the situation we have right now in the global economy. So every investor more or less looks right now, is especially the Federal Reserve now ending its path of rising interest rates, or did they go on with a rise in interest rates? So interest rates, especially of the Federal Reserve and also the European Central Bank. But in this case, I showed you also that we have some, so to speak, time lag between the interest rates of the European Central Bank and the Fed. So more or less, we are still following the most influential central bank in the world, the Federal Reserve. So not arguing that it is a one-to-one dependence between what is the economy doing and interest rates, but setting the interest rates by the Federal Reserve or by the central bank is one of the most influential economic variables we have. And this we see also when we look in the time series in history. So it is not a very bad assumption that we assume that the central bank can more or less steering the price development. And so then if we make this assumption about rational expectations, then we are setting, if we make no mistakes, interest rates equal to expected, not interest rates, inflation equals expected inflation. And this I showed you here in this diagram. This is then, conceptually, again, more or less something which you have already seen in other models, that we say, of course, okay, we have this reaction function, and if we look at this reaction function, we see here that this is just a linear line, and that this linear line has a slope by assumption about these parameters, which is less than 0. And, so to speak, this equilibrium condition is nothing else than a 45-degree line, or a linear line cutting through the origin with slope 1. And this has a slope less than 1. And this then means that we have here a definite cut of these two lines. And this is then our equilibrium inflation rate. And this one then we set in. and after some calculations, we obtained then an inflation rate of k minus 1 times b over a. And here you see also that more or less it is essential that we make this assumption that k is larger than 1. So here we see that it is essential that k is larger than 1, otherwise the inflation rate would be negative. And setting in this in our loss function, we obtained these overall losses. And yeah, and why do we have now a problem after having calculated this is that we now want to compare these losses if we would set inflation rates definitely to 0. So then let's take this one. This diagram we had here already. So let me skip this. So first we have then losses under rational expectations. So here we had P star is k minus 1 times B over A, if I remember this right. Yep. And then let me take this one. No, why is it not working? No. Still a 2 missing. Now it should work. This we don't need. This one. So this were losses. And losses with or losses if central bank sets inflation definitely on target P equals pi 0 equals 0. Because remember, this is our, let me copy this too, this one and this one. That we have here a loss function, and since inflation rate feeds in there quadratically, then we know that this is a parabola and it has its minimum in, if we look only at the price development at pi equals to 0. So this, we know that this is the target inflation rate of the central bank. Well, and now let's just calculate the losses if we are on target. If we are on target and we are believing the central bank that it is set to 0, then y equals y star plus b times 0 minus 0. Society is believing the central bank and then of course we are just at potential output. Then we obtain the economy at potential output. And now let's feed in this. If we say then losses of pi equals 0 and we are believing, so also expected inflation equals to 0. Well, this is not very hard to do. Then we obtain 1/2 times a times 0 squared plus, and now we have also that we here at potential output is y star minus k y star squared, and sorry, here we have a plus. This I have to change also here, I see, of course. And then we obtain 1/2 times y star times k minus 1, and this has to be squared. So, and if we compare this with rational expectations, and what we see then is that we have this part here of, so to speak, the commitment case I'm announcing as a central bank. So Ms. Lagarde is going to the press conference and she says we will do everything that inflation rate will be at 0%, and we are believing this. And if this then happens, then we obtain these losses. And if we look at the rational expectation equilibrium, then we have here the part of losses with L of pi equals 0, pi e equals 0. And since this part here, and again, you see this crucial assumption that k is larger than 1. If it would be 1, then this part would be 0, but if it's larger than 0, then we know that this part is larger than 0, and so we know then that losses under rational expectations of pi equals pi star and pi e pi equals p equals pi star is larger than, and this we call then commitment. So the central bank is committing on the target of setting inflation rates on their specific target of 0% is larger than pi equals 0, pi e equals 0. So RE, rational expectations, and C, commitment. So what we then see, that if we, so to speak, let the market doing, and that we are, so to speak, free in the reaction of the central bank, and that we as a society have rational expectation that in the end everybody is losing because the overall losses are larger than we would have it if we directly set inflation rate to 0. So under the rational expectation scenario, the central bank has an incentive to deviate from its announced inflation rate. But the result will be an overall loss for the economy, since losses within this setup are in the end larger than in case of setting inflation definitely to pi equals 0. And maybe can you explain where within this model we find these incentive of the central bank to deviate from inflation, from its announced inflation rate? Well, actually, if we look here at the Phillips curve, then we see that if we make an announcement and then, yeah, we look at the dependence between output and inflation rate, or in a better way, depending on the difference between inflation rate and expected inflation rate, then this means if the society forms its expectation and we take these expectation as a central bank as fixed, then we see that if we would then increase inflation, that we can push output a little bit higher. So if this is larger than 0, so if we are surprising the society by setting within the inflation rate to a higher inflation rate, then we have, so to speak, gains for the output, and we can even push output in this case. And then in the end, under rational expectations, we assume that, okay, so to speak, the society then assumes that the central bank will deviate, that they will cheat, so then they also increase their expectations, inflation expectations, until we here in this equilibrium. And in the end, everybody is losing. So this incentive comes from the dependence of output y on the inflation differential pi minus pi e, because then if central bank takes pi e of the society as given, so to speak fixed, the central bank has an incentive to further increase inflation pi in order to get with pi minus pi e larger than 0 an output gain via the Phillips curve. So this is moving up if the bracket is larger than 0. Well, do you remember where we have already discussed such a problem? And maybe you have seen this also already in other lectures. Because in the end, it is more or less or conceptually definitely always the same what we see then in economics, that we want something good, but in the end, if everybody is yeah, is how do I call this, yeah, is working rational, that we have a bad outcome in the end. If you think at the start of our lecture, where we also had some little models where we said, well, we are doing something given the expectation or given the reaction of some other agent in the economy. Well, in the end, this is conceptually the same argumentation as we have it in the prisoner's dilemma. Also there, we take the reaction of the other part as given, and if you remember, then we, so to speak, end up in the bad equilibrium. And if both opponents would agree to each other, then we could move to a Pareto better situation. And the same we have here. If under commitment, both agents in the economy, the central bank and the society, would believe each other, then we, so to speak, end up in a scenario where we have less losses than in the scenario when we have rational expectations, where everybody is working rational given the expectations of the other ones, or given the reaction of the other ones. So this means in the end, the problem we have in this case is conceptually the same as we have it in the prisoner's dilemma. Also, in this case, we end up in an Pareto inefficient equilibrium if both economic agents working rational given the expectations or reaction of the other as fixed. So, and this is then, so to speak, called time inconsistency problem, because we assume then that we have here some time dependence, so to speak. The central bank is announcing something, then the society is forming its expectations. If the expectations are formed, these expectations are feed in the reaction function of the central bank, then they have this incentive to even push inflation, and this again is also feed in again in the expectations of society, and in the end we obtain a suboptimal inflation rate in the economy. And then we can discuss how we could overcome this time inconsistency problem. And for this, let's take up this loss function. So how can we overcome this time inconsistency problem? If you look at these loss functions, what could we change in this loss function so that this problem would be less, or it could even vanish? So somehow we need that, so to speak, inflation becomes more important. If you look at this function, which parameter we have to change then? Or if you look also at this reaction function, where do we have it? So where is it, our reaction function? Here it is. So if we look at this, and then, let's see here. So this parameter A is the weight of the inflation target. And if we increase A, then also let's have a look at our losses. Here we have A times B over A, but we have it in brackets squared. So if we increase A, then this part will decrease, because you can cancel 1A with A squared down here. So you have still 1A left, and you are dividing by this parameter A. So if you increase this parameter A, then this part will decrease, and yeah, so to speak, if you increase it more and more and more, then more or less this part of your losses in the limit will vanish, and then you have the same losses as you have it in in the scenario with commitment. Or so if A increases, then the losses due to the incentive of the central bank to surprise society with higher inflation will decrease. Well, let's take also this part that we see it. Up. Too much. So if we take this, then we have k minus 1 squared p squared over a. So this, if a increases, then this have to decrease due to the fact that we are still dividing by 1a. Or so to speak, if this a increases, the benefit the central bank has from the case that they can push the economy is in the weight not that high, because they look more at the inflation target. So, but this then means that more or less an increase of this weight of the inflation target means that society has to more or less believe that the central bank will really do what they have announced. And this is then in the end about reputation of a central bank. That I, as a society, know of course, okay, they have an incentive to deviate, but since a large parameter A here, then I think that they will not deviate and use these incentive for pushing the output. So a large A means that the central bank has a high reputation that they are doing what they have announced. And this more or less then means one has a, so to speak, conservative central banker. Well, and this has had also in the at the beginning of the euro, yeah, a very high, a very large, controversial discussion, because when the euro has started, so to speak, the discussions in the midst of the 90s and then started in 1999, then the first one was the question, where will be this ECB situated? And there, Germany, so to speak, made the race, and the ECB came to Frankfurt. Well, but the other large economy within the Eurozone, France, was not that happy. And therefore, politically, you had to give, so to speak, France something in order to start the euro. And for this, then the deal was that, okay, the central bank is situated in Frankfurt, but we start with a French central banker, central bank president. But then it was about this reputation that Germany stepped in and that, well, we want to have a hard currency like the German mark. And if we would start with a French central banker, and the French central bank wasn't very famous to look mainly on inflation in history, and therefore then the deal was that the first period of the president of the central bank was split into two periods, that we started with Wim Duisenberg, a Dutch central banker, also known more or less somehow as conservative as it was within the Bundesbank, that he would be president for the first 4 years, and afterwards Jean-Claude Trichet then overtook the presidency. So, and all this was more or less then due to this time inconsistency problems, because Germany really feared that if we do not have a conservative central banker, that then we would have a problem with the euro. And also in the beginning of the ECB, it was more or less clear that the chief economist of the European Central Bank has to be a German guy. And this, then lasted until the financial crisis. And we talked about this. Then within the financial crisis, we started these very expensive monetary policy. And within these crises in the aftermath of 2008, 2009, I think then in 2012, this German chief economist, Johannes Stark, then stepped down because he said, well, I will not be anymore in the board of the European Central Bank if you start to buy government bonds every month in an amount of 40 to 60 to 80 billion euros. And this is still somehow a fight between how conservative should be a central bank and or if I should push the economy via expansive monetary policy. So this was also a problem in the beginning of the euro. So Wim Duisenberg, Netherlands, then to Jean-Claude Trichet. So he more or less conservative, and he less conservative. Actually, in the end, the Germans had a fear that Jean-Claude Trichet wouldn't be very conservative, but when he was then, so to speak, in power in the ECB, he was even within the financial crisis quite conservative. And then the really turn in monetary policy we had when Mario Draghi then overtook the presidency of the um, of the ECB, and also the step down of Johannes Stark as chief economist of the ECB. I think it was 2012. Let's see. So where we are here. But let's see, there will be some Wikipedia. Oh, this is someone else. Physicist? No. There he is, but oops. Below project. Below. Well, I do not find. I think it was around 2012 when ECB started by government bonds. Well, and of course, you more or less also can solve the problem if you just get rid of these output target, and if you would only focus, of course, on inflation. But this, in the end, we have not in very many central banks anymore. And then, yeah, here it is then these reputation, or we more or less say we have a definite rule by setting it. Or what was also discussed is that you write some incentive contracts. So if you are the president of a central bank, then you more or less write a contract that you will keep an eye on inflation, and if you are deviating from this, then you will be punished. And this actually was done in New Zealand, that they really wrote for their, so to speak, politicians, and this was not only done within the Central Bank of New Zealand, but also when a new government stepped in. They also really hard committed themselves via an incentive contract that they want to achieve some special target. But in the end, then the theory also shows that it is the world is always not that easy as within our simple models, more or less. And if you write down more realistic models, especially with stochastic shocks, then also this argument that a conservative central bank is always better than a not so conservative central bank also doesn't hold anymore from theory, and that then this reputation argument becomes more unambiguous. Okay, and one last hint, I think this I put on my last slide. Well, my PhD thesis was also mainly about all this stuff about transparency and minimizing central bank losses. And I had there also an application of this Barrow-Gordon model, which we discussed here, the time inconsistency. And what I also found is from Alan Blinder, also a very famous economist, that he, anecdotally then wrote down this prisoners problem also in the education sector. So if what I'm wrote down here, and that you then more or less announce an exam, and then everybody is starting to learn. And if you are coming in writing the exam, then I just say, well, the exam is cancelled. And in the end, everybody is, so to speak, then better off. You have learned, and I do not have to correct all the exams. But then, of course, you learn, you make your expectations, and in the end, nobody is learning anything anymore. And then we also end up more or less in an equilibrium, which is closely related to prisoners' dilemma. And here I gave you also the link, and maybe it's quite funny to read it, that you have there also this prisoner's dilemma. And maybe also you have done this maybe in your micro or in some business administration course. If you look at the situation of a Cournot oligopoly, when you have two companies competing with each other in one market, that in the Cournot equilibrium, they are also worse off compared to the situation that they stick together and then take all the gains in the market from monopoly optimization. So if they compete with each other, their gains are less than compared to the case, well, let's, so to speak, act as one company, then getting the gains from a monopoly, and afterwards divide these gains by two. This is then the so-called monopole Stackelberg and Cournot competition. I don't know if you have done this. Okay. Oh, I talked a little bit long today again. Sorry.